Chapter 15 of A Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 15. During Yoletta's seclusion, my education was not allowed to suffer, her place as instructress having been taken by Edra. I was pleased with this arrangement, thinking to derive some benefit from it, beyond what she might teach me, but very soon I was forced to abandon all hope of communicating with the imprisoned girl through her friend and jailer. Edra was much disturbed at the suggestion, for I did venture to suggest it, though in a tentative, roundabout form, not feeling sure of my ground. Previous mistakes had made me cautious. Her manner was a sufficient warning, and I did not broach the subject a second time. One afternoon, however, I met with a great and unexpected consolation, though even this was mixed with some perplexing matters. One day, after looking long and earnestly into my face, said my gentle teacher to me, "Do you know that you are changed? All your gay spirits have left you, and you are pale and thin and sad. Why is this?" My face crimsoned at this very direct question, for I knew of that change in me, and went about in continual fear that others would presently notice it, and draw their own conclusions. She continued looking at me, until for very shame I turned my face aside, for if I had confessed that separation from Yoletta caused my dejection, she would know what that feeling meant, and I feared that any such premature declaration would be the ruin of my prospects. "I know the reason, though I ask you," she continued, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You are grieving for Yoletta. I saw it from the first. I shall tell her how pale and sad you have grown, how different from what you were. But why do you turn your face from me?" I was perplexed, but her sympathy gave me courage, and made me determined to give her my confidence. "If you know," said I, "that I am grieving for Yoletta, can you not also guess why I hesitate and hide my face from you?" "No. Why is it? You love me also, though not with so great a love. But we do love each other, Smith, and you can confide in me." I looked into her face now, straight into her transparent eyes, and it was plain to see that she had not yet guessed my meaning. "Dearest Edra," I said, taking her hand, "I love you as much as if one mother had given us birth, but I love Yoletta with a different love, not as one loves a sister. She is more to me than anyone else in the world. So much is she that life without her would be a burden. Do you know what that means?" And then, remembering Yoletta's words on the hills, I added, "Do you not know of more than one kind of love?" "No," she answered, still gazing inquiringly into my face, "but I know that your love for her so greatly exceeds all others that it is like a different feeling. I shall tell her, since it is sweet to be loved, and she will be glad to know it." "And after you have told her, Edra, shall you make known her reply to me?" "No, Smith, it is an offense to suggest, or even to think, such a thing, however much you may love her, for she is not allowed to converse with any one directly or through me. She told me that she saw you on the hills, and that you tried to go to her, and it distressed her very much. But she will forgive you when I have told her how great your love is, that the desire to look on her face made you forget how wrong it was to approach her." How strange and incomprehensible it seemed that Edra had so misinterpreted my feeling! It seemed also to me that they all, from the father of the house downwards, were very blind indeed to set down so strong an emotion to mere brotherly affection. I had wished, yet feared, to remove the scales from their eyes, and now, in an unguarded moment, I had made the attempt, and my gentle confessor had failed to understand me. Nevertheless, I extracted some comfort from this conversation, for Yoletta would know how greatly my love exceeded that of her own kindred, and I hoped against hope that a responsive emotion would at last awaken in her breast. When the last of those leaden-footed 30 days arrived, the day on which, according to my computation, Yoletta would recover liberty before the sunset, I rose early from the straw pallet where I had tossed all night, prevented from sleeping by the prospect of reunion, and the fever of impatience I was in. The cold river revived me, and when we were assembled in the breakfast room, I observed Edra watching me, with a curious, questioning smile on her lips. I asked her the reason. "You are like a person suddenly recovered from sickness," she replied. "Your eyes sparkle like sunshine on the water, and your cheeks, that were so pallid yesterday, burn redder than an autumn leaf." Then, smiling, she added these precious words: "Yoletta will be glad to return to us, more on your account than her own." After we had broken our fast, I determined to go to the forest and spend the day there. For many days past I had shirked wood cutting, but now it seemed impossible for me to settle down to any quiet, sedentary kind of work, the consuming impatience and boundless energy I felt making me wish for some unusually violent task, such as would exhaust the body and give, perhaps, a rest to the mind. Taking my axe and the usual small basket of provisions for my noonday meal, I left the house, and on this morning I did not walk, but ran as if for a wager, taking long, flying leaps over bushes and streams that had never tempted me before. Arrived at the scene of action, I selected a large tree which had been marked out for felling, and for hours I hacked at it with an energy almost superhuman, and at last, before I had felt any disposition to rest, the towering old giant, bowing its head and rustling its sere foliage as if in eternal farewell to the skies, came with a mighty crash to the earth. Scarcely was it fallen before I felt that I had labored too long and violently. The dry, fresh breeze stung my burning cheeks like needles of ice. My knees trembled under me, and the whole world seemed to spin round. Then, casting myself upon a bed of chips and withered leaves, I lay gasping for breath, with only life enough left in me to wonder whether I had fainted or not. Recovered at length from this exhausted condition, I sat up, and rejoiced to observe that half the day, that last miserable day, had already flown. Then the thoughts of the approaching evening, and all the happiness it would bring, inspired me with fresh zeal and strength, and, starting to my feet, and taking no thought of my food, I picked up the axe and made a fresh onslaught on the fallen tree. I had already accomplished more than a day's work, but the fever in my blood and brain urged me on to the arduous task of lopping off the huge branches, and my exertions did not cease until once more the world, with everything on it, began revolving like a whirligig, compelling me to desist and take a still longer rest, and sitting there I thought only of Yoletta. How would she look after that long seclusion? Pale and sad too, perhaps, and her sweet, soulful eyes, oh, would I now see in them that new light for which I had watched and waited so long? Then, while I thus mused, I heard, not far off, a slight rustling sound, as of a hare startled at seeing me, and bounding away over the withered leaves, and lifting up my eyes from the ground, I beheld Yoletta herself hastening towards me, her face shining with joy. I sprang forward to meet her, and in another moment she was locked in my arms. Then one moment of unspeakable happiness seemed to outweigh 100 times all the misery I had endured. "Oh, my sweet darling, at last, my pain is ended," I murmured, while pressing her again and again to my heart, and kissing that dear face, which looked now so much thinner than when I had last seen it. She bent back her head, like Genevieve in the ballad, to look me in the face, her eyes filled with tears, crystal, happy drops, which dimmed not their brightness. But her face was pale, with a pensive pallor like that of the Gloire de Dijon rose. Only now excitement had suffused her cheeks with the tints of that same rose, that red so unlike the bloom on other faces in vanished days, so tender and delicate, and precious above all tints in nature. "I know," she spoke, "how you were grieving for me, that you were pale and dejected. Oh, how strange you should love me so much!" "Strange, darling! That word again! It is the one sweetness and joy of life. And are you not glad to be loved?" "Oh, I cannot tell you how glad. But am I not here in your arms to show it? When I heard that you had gone to the wood, I did not wait, but ran here as fast as I could. Do you remember that evening on the hill, when you vexed me with questions, and I could not understand your words? Now, when I love you so much more, I can understand them better. Tell me, have I not done as you wished, and given myself to you, body and soul? How 30 days have changed you! Oh, Smith, do you love me so much?" "I love you so much, dear, that if you were to die, there would be no more pleasure in life for me, and I should prefer to lie near you underground. All day long I am thinking of you, and when I sleep you are in all ray dreams." She still continued gazing into my face, those happy tears still shining in her eyes, listening to my words. But alas, on that sweet, beautiful face, so full of changeful expression, there was not the expression I sought, and no sign of that maidenly shame which gave to Genevieve in the ballad such an exquisite grace in her lover's eyes. "I also had dreams of you," she answered. "They came to me after Edra had told me how pale and sad you had grown." "Tell me one of your dreams, darling." "I dreamed that I was lying awake on my bed, with the moon shining on me. I was cold, and crying bitterly because I had been left so long alone. All at once I saw you standing at my side in the moonlight. 'Poor Yoletta,' you said, 'your tears have chilled you like winter rain.' Then you kissed them dry, and when you had put your arms about me, I drew your face against my bosom, and rested warm and happy in your love." Oh, how her delicious words maddened me! Even my tongue and lips suddenly became dry as ashes with the fever in me, and could only whisper huskily when I strove to answer. I released her from my arms and sat down on the fallen tree. All my blissful raptures turned to a great despondence. Would it always be thus? Would she continue to embrace me and speak words that simulated passion, while no such feeling touched her heart? Such a state of things could not endure, and my passion, mocked and baffled again and again, would rend me to pieces, and hurl me on to madness and self-destruction. For how many men had been driven by love to such an end, and the women they had worshipped, and miserably died for, compared with Yoletta, were like creatures of clay compared with one of the immortals. And was she not a being of a higher order than myself? It was folly to think otherwise. But how had mortals always fared when they aspired to mate with celestials? I tried then to remember something bearing on this important point, but my mind was becoming strangely confused. I closed my eyes to think, and presently opening them again, saw Yoletta kneeling before me, gazing up into my face with an alarmed expression. "What is the matter, Smith? You seem ill," she said, and then, laying her fresh palm on my forehead, added, "Your head burns like fire." "No wonder," I returned. "I'm worrying my brains trying to remember all about them. What were their names, and what did they do to those who loved them? Can't you tell me?" "Oh, you are ill. You have a fever and may die," she exclaimed, throwing her arms about my neck and pressing her cheek to mine. I felt a strange imbecility of mind, yet it seemed to anger me to be told that I was ill. "I am not ill," I protested feebly. "I never felt better in my life. But can't you answer me? Who were they, and what did they do? Tell me, or I shall go mad." She started up, and taking the small metal whistle hanging at her side, blew a shrill note that seemed to pierce my brain like a steel weapon. I tried to get up from my seat on the trunk, but only slipped down to the ground. A dull mist and gloom seemed to be settling down on everything. Daylight, and hope with it, was fast forsaking the world. But something was coming to us. Out of that universal mist and darkness closing around us it came bounding swiftly through the wood. A huge gray wolf! No, not a wolf. A wolf was nothing to it. A mighty roaring lion crashing through the forest, a monster ever increasing in size, vast and of horrible aspect, surpassing all monsters of the imagination, all beasts gigantic and deformed that had ever existed in past geologic ages. A lion with teeth like elephant's tusks, its head clothed as with a black thundercloud, through which its eyes glared like twin blood-red suns. And she, my love, with a cry on her lips, was springing forth to meet it. Lost, lost forever! I struggled frantically to rise and fly to her assistance, and rose, after many efforts, to my knees, only to fall again to the earth, insensible. End of chapter 15. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. Of a Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 16. The violent fever into which I had fallen did not abate until the third day, when I fell into a profound slumber, from which I woke refreshed and saved. I did not, on awakening, find myself in my own familiar cell, but in a spacious apartment new to me, on a comfortable bed, beside which Edra was seated. Almost my first feeling was one of disappointment at not seeing Yoletta there, and presently I began to fear that in the ravings of delirium I had spoken things which had plucked the scales from the eyes of my kind friends in a very rough way indeed, and that the being I loved best had been permanently withdrawn from my sight. It was a blessed relief when Edra, in answer to the questions I put with some heart-quakings to her, informed me that I had talked a great deal in my fever, but unintelligibly, continually asking questions about Venus, Diana, Juno, and many other persons whose names had never before been heard in the house. How fortunate that my crazy brain had thus continued vexing itself with this idle question! She also told me that Yoletta had watched day and night at my side, that at last, when the fever had left me, and I had fallen into that cooling slumber, she too, with her hand on mine, had dropped her head on the pillow and fallen asleep. Then, without waking her, they had carried her away to her own room, and Edra had taken her place by my side. "Have you nothing more to ask?" she said at length, with an accent of surprise. "No, nothing more. What you have told me has made me very happy. What more can I wish to know?" "But there is more to tell you, Smith. We know that your illness is the result of your own imprudence, and as soon as you are well enough to leave your room and bear it, you must suffer the punishment." "What? Punished for being ill?" I exclaimed, sitting bolt upright in my bed. "What do you mean, Edra? I never heard such outrageous nonsense in my life." She was disturbed at this outburst, but quietly and gravely repeated that I must certainly be punished for my illness. Remembering what their punishments were, I had the prospect of a second long separation from Yoletta, and the thought of such excessive severity, or rather of such cruel injustice, made me wild. "By heaven, I shall not submit to it!" I exclaimed. "Punished for being ill! Who ever heard of such a thing? I suppose that by and by it will be discovered that the bridge of my nose is not quite straight, or that I can't see round the corner, and that also will be set down as a crime, to be expiated in solitary confinement on a bread and water diet. No, you shall not punish me. Rather than give in to such tyranny, I'll walk off and leave the house forever." She regarded me with an expression almost approaching to horror on her gentle face, and for some moments made no reply. Then I remembered that if I carried out that insane threat, I should indeed lose Yoletta, and the very thought of such a loss was more than I could endure. And for a moment I almost hated the love which made me so helpless and miserable, so powerless to oppose their stupid and barbarous practices. It would have been sweet then to have felt free, free to fling them a curse, and go away, shaking the dust of their house from my shoes, supposing that any dust had adhered to them. Then Edra began to speak again, and gravely and sorrowfully, but without a touch of austerity in her tone or manner, censured me for making use of such irrational language, and for allowing bitter, resentful thoughts to enter my heart. But the despondence and sullen rage into which I had been thrown made me proof even against the medicine of an admonition imparted so gently, and, turning my face away, I stubbornly refused to make any reply. For a while she was silent, but I misjudged her when I imagined that she would now leave me, offended to my own reflections. "Do you not know that you are giving me pain?" she said at last, drawing a little closer to me. "A little while ago you told me that you loved me. Has that feeling faded so soon, or do you take any pleasure in wounding those you love?" Her words, and more than her words, her tender, pleading tone, pierced me with compunction, and I could not resist. "Edra, my sweet sister, do not imagine such a thing," I said. "I would rather endure many punishments than give you pain. My love for you cannot fade while I have life and understanding. It is in me like greenness in the leaf, that beautiful color which can only be changed by sere decay." She smiled forgiveness, and with a humid brightness in her eyes, which somehow made me think of that joy of the angels over one sinner that repenteth, bent down and touched her lips to mine. "How can you love me any more than that, Smith?" she said. "Yet you say that your love for Yoletta exceeds all others." "Yes, dear, exceeds all others, as the light of the sun exceeds that of the moon and the stars. Can you not understand that? Has no man ever loved you with a love like that, my sister?" She shook her head and sighed. Did she not understand my meaning now? Had not my words brought back some sweet and sorrowful memory? With her hands folded idly on her lap, and her face half averted, she sat gazing at nothing. It seemed impossible that this woman, so tender and so beautiful, should never have experienced in herself or witnessed in another the feeling I had questioned her about. But she made no further reply to my words, and as I lay there watching her, the drowsy spirit the fever had left in me overcame my brain, and I slept once more. For several days, which brought me so little strength that I was not permitted to leave the sick room, I heard nothing further about my punishment, for I purposely refrained from asking any questions, and no person appeared inclined to bring forward so disagreeable a subject. At length I was pronounced well enough to go about the house, although still very feeble, and I was conducted, not to the judgment room where I had expected to be taken, but to the mother's room, and there I found the father of the house, seated with Chastel, and with them 7 or 8 of the others. They all welcomed me, and seemed glad to see me out again, but I could not help remarking a certain subdued, almost solemn air about them, which seemed to remind me that I was regarded as an offender already found guilty, who had now been brought up to receive judgment. "My son," said the father, addressing me in a calm, judicial tone, which at once put my last remaining hopes to flight, "it is a conclusion to us to know that your offense is of such a nature that it cannot diminish our esteem for you, or loosen the bonds of affection which unite you to us. You are still feeble, and perhaps a little confused in mind concerning the events of the last few days. I do not therefore press you to give an account of them, but shall simply state your offense, and if I am mistaken in any particular you shall correct me. The great love you have for Yoletta," he continued, and at this I started and blushed painfully, but the succeeding words served to show that I had only too little cause for alarm. "The great love you have for Yoletta caused you much suffering during her 30 days' seclusion from us, so that you lost all enjoyment of life, and eating little, and being in continual dejection, your strength was much diminished. On the last day you were so much excited at the prospect of reunion with her that you went to your task in the woods almost fasting, and probably after spending a restless night. Tell me if this is not so." "I did not sleep that night," I replied, somewhat huskily. "Unrefreshed by sleep, and with lessened strength," he continued, "you went to the woods, and in order to allay that excitement in your mind, you labored with such energy that by noon you had accomplished a task which, in another and calmer condition of mind and body, would have occupied you more than one day. In this acting you had already been guilty of a serious offense against yourself, but even then you might have escaped the consequences if, after finishing your work, you had rested and refreshed yourself with food and drink. This, however, you neglected to do, for when you had fallen insensible to the earth, and Yoletta had called the dog and sent it to the house to summon assistance, the food you had taken with you was found untasted in the basket. Your life was thus placed in great peril, and although it is good to lay life down when it has become a burden to ourselves and others, being darkened by that failure of power from which there is no recovery, wantonly or carelessly to endanger it in the flower of its strength and beauty is a great folly and a great offense. Consider how deep our grief would have been, especially the grief of Yoletta, if this culpable disregard of your own safety and well-being had ended fatally, as it came so near ending. It is therefore just and righteous that an offense of such nature should be recompensed. But it is a light offense, not like one committed against the house, or even against another person. And we also remember the occasion of it, since it was no unworthy motive, but exceeding love, which clouded your judgment, and therefore, taking all these things into account, it was my intention to put you away from us for the space of 13 days. Here he paused, as if expecting me to make some reply. He had reproved me so gently, even approving of the emotion, although still entirely in the dark as to its meaning, which had caused my illness, that I was made to feel very submissive, and even grateful to him. "It is only just," I replied, "that I should suffer for my fault, and you have tempered justice with more mercy than I deserve." "You speak with the wisdom of a chastened spirit, my son," he said, rising and placing his hand on my head. "And your words gladden me all the more for knowing that you were filled with surprise and resentment when told that your offense was one deserving punishment. And now, my son, I have to tell you that you will not be separated from us, for the mother of the house has willed that your offense shall be pardoned." I looked in surprise at Chastel, for this was very unexpected. She was gazing at my face with the light of a strange tenderness in her eyes, never seen there before. She extended her hand, and kneeling before her, I took it in mine and raised it to my lips and tried, with poor success, to speak my thanks for this rare and beautiful act of mercy. Then the others surrounded me to express their congratulations, the men pressing my hands, but not so the women, for they all freely kissed me. But when Yoletta, coming last, put her white arms about my neck and pressed her lips to mine, the ecstasy I felt was so greatly overbalanced by the pain of my position and the thought, now almost a conviction, that I was powerless to enlighten them with regard to the nature of the love I felt for her, that I almost shrank from her dear embrace. End of chapter 16. Recording by Ginger Kukalo.
Of A Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle. A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 17. My attack of illness, although sharp, had passed off so quickly that I confidently looked to complete restoration to my former vigorous state of health in a very short time. Nevertheless, many days went by, and I failed to recover strength, but remained pretty much in that condition of body in which I had quitted the sick room. This surprised and distressed me at first, but in a little time I began to get reconciled to such a state, and even to discover that it had certain advantages, the chief of which was that the tumult of my mind was over for a season, so that I craved for nothing very eagerly. My friends advised me to do no work, but not wishing to eat the bread of idleness, although the bread was little now, as I had little appetite, I made it a rule to go every morning to the workhouse, and to occupy myself for 2 or 3 hours with some light mechanical task, which put no strain on me, physical or mental. Even this playing at work fatigued me. Then, after changing my dress, I would repair to the music room, to resume my search after hidden knowledge in any books that happened to be there. For I could read now, a result which my sweet schoolmistress had been the first to see, and at once she had abandoned the lessons I had loved so much, leaving me to wander at will, but without a guide, in that wilderness of strange literature. I had never been to the library, and did not even know in what part of the house it was situated, nor had I ever expressed a wish to see it, and that for 2 reasons. One was, that I had already half resolved (my resolutions were usually of that complexion) never to run the risk of appearing desirous of knowing too much. The other and weightier reason was, that I had never loved libraries. They oppressed me with a painful sense of my mental inferiority; for all those tens of thousands of volumes, containing so much important but unappreciated matter, seemed to have a kind of collective existence, and to look down on me, like a man with great staring owlish eyes, as an intruder on sacred ground, a barbarian whose proper place is in the woods. It is a mere fancy, I know, but it distresses me, and I prefer not to put myself in the way of it. Once in a book I met with a scornful passage about people with bodily constitutions like those of horses, and small brains, which made me blush painfully; but in the very next passage the writer makes amends, saying that a man ought to think himself well off, if in the lottery of life he draws the prize of a healthy stomach without a mind; that it is better than a fine intellect with a crazy stomach. I had drawn the healthy stomach, liver, lungs, and heart to match, and had never felt dissatisfied with my prize. Now, however, it seemed expedient that I should give some hours each day to reading, for so far my conversations and close intimacy with the people of the house had not dissipated the cloud of mystery in which their customs were hid; and by customs I here refer to those relating to courtship and matrimony only, for that was to me the main thing. The books I read or dipped into were all highly interesting, especially the odd volumes I looked at belonging to that long series on the Houses of the World, for these abounded in marvelous and entertaining matter. There were also histories of the house, and works on arts, agriculture, and various other subjects, but they were not what I wanted. After 3 or 4 hours spent in these fruitless researches, I would proceed to the mother's room, where I was now permitted to enter freely every afternoon, and when there, to remain as long as I wished; and it was so pleasant that I soon dropped into the custom of remaining until supper time compelled me to leave it, Chastel invariably treating me now with a loving tenderness of manner, which seemed strange when I recalled the extremely unfavorable impression I had made at our first interview. It was never my nature to be indolent, or to love a quiet, dreamy existence. On the contrary, my fault had lain in the opposite direction, unlimited muscular exercise being as necessary to my well being as fresh air and good food; and the rougher the exercise the better I liked it. But now, in this novel condition of languor, I experienced a wonderful restfulness, both of body and mind; and in the mother's room, resting as if some weariness of labor still clung to me, breathing and steeped in that fragrant, summer like atmosphere, I had long intervals of perfect inactivity and silence, while I sat or reclined, not thinking, but in a reverie, while many dreams of pleasures to come drifted in a vague, vaporous manner through my brain. The very character of the room, its delicate richness, the exquisitely harmonious disposition of colors and objects, and the illusions of nature produced on the mind, seemed to lend itself to this unaccustomed mood, and to confirm me in it. The first impression produced was one of brightness. Coming to it by way of the long dim sculpture gallery was like passing out into the open air, and this effect was partly due to the white and crystal surfaces, and the brilliancy of the colors, where any color appeared. It was spacious and lofty, and the central arched or domed portion of the roof, which was of a light turquoise blue, rested on graceful columns of polished crystal. The doors were of amber colored glass set in agate frames, but the windows, 8 in number, formed the principal attraction. On the glass, hill and mountain scenery was depicted, the summits in some of them appearing beyond wide barren plains whitened with the noonday splendor and heat of midsummer, untempered by a cloud, the soaring peaks showing a pearly luster which seemed to remove them to an infinite distance, to look out, as it were, from the imitation of shade of such an arbor or pavilion over those far off sunlit expanses where the light appeared to dance and quiver as one gazed, was a never failing delight. Such was its effect on me, combined with that of the mother's new tender graciousness, resulting I knew not whither from compassion or affection, that I could have wished to remain a permanent invalid in her room. Another cause of the mild kind of happiness I now experienced was a consciousness of a change in my own mental disposition. which made me less of an alien in the house, for I was now able, I imagined, to appreciate the beautiful character of my friends, their crystal purity of heart, and the religion they professed. Far back in the old days I had heard, first and last, a great deal about sweetness and light and Philistines, and not quite knowing what this grand question was all about, and hearing from some of my friends that I was without the qualities they valued most, I thereafter proclaimed myself a Philistine, and was satisfied to have the controversy ended in that way, so far as it concerned me personally. Now, however, I was like one to whom some important thing has been told, who, scarcely hearing and straightway forgetting, goes about his affairs, but lying awake at night in the silence of his chamber, recalls the unheeded words and perceives their full significance. My sojourn with this people, angelic women and mild-eyed men, with downy, unrazored lips, so mild in manner and yet in their arts laying broad basis for eternity, above all the invalid hours spent daily in the mother's room, had taught me how unlovely a creature I had been. It would have been strange indeed if, in such an atmosphere, I had not absorbed a little sweetness and light into my system. In this sweet refuge, this slumberous valley where I had been cast up by that swift black current that had borne me to an immeasurable distance on its bosom, and with such a change going on within me, I sometimes thought that a little more, and I would touch that serene, enduring bliss which seemed to be the normal condition of my fellow inmates. My passion for Yoletta now burned with a gentle flame which did not consume, but only imparted an agreeable sense of warmth to the system. When she was there, sitting with me at her mother's feet, sometimes so near that her dark shining hair brushed against my cheek, and her fragrant breath came upon my face, and when she caressed my hand and gazed full at me with those dear eyes that had no shadow of regret or anxiety in them, but only unfathomable love, I could imagine that our union was already complete, and that she was altogether and eternally mine. I knew that this could not continue. Sometimes I could not prevent my thoughts from flying away from the present. Then suddenly the complexion of my dream would change, darkening like a fair landscape when a cloud obscures the sun. Not forever would the demon of passion slumber and dream in my breast. With recovered strength it would wake again, and ever increasing in power, and ever baffled of its desire, would raise once more that black tempest of the past to overwhelm me. Other dark visions followed. I would see myself, as in a magic glass, lying with upturned, ghastly face, with many people about me, hurrying to and fro, wringing their hands, and weeping aloud with grief, shuddering at the abhorred sight of blood on their sacred shining floors; or, worse still, I saw myself shivering in sordid rags, and gaunt with long fasting famine, a fugitive in some wintry, desolate land, far from all human companionship, the very image of Yoletta scorched by madness to formless ashes in my brain, and for all sensations, feelings, memories, thoughts, nothing left to me but a distorted likeness of the visible world, and a terrible unrest urging me, as with a whip of scorpions, ever on and on, to ford yet other black icy torrents, and tear myself bleeding through yet other thorny thickets, and climb ramparts of yet other gigantic barren hills. But these moments of terrible depression, new to my life, were infrequent, and seldom lasted long. Chastel was my good angel; a word, a touch from her hand, and the ugly spirits would vanish. She appeared to possess a mysterious faculty, perhaps only the keen insight and sympathy of a highly spiritualized nature, which informed her of much that was passing in my heart. If a shadow came there when she had no wish or strength to converse, she would make me draw close to her seat, and rest her hand on mine, and the shadow would pass from me. I could not help reflecting often and wonderingly at this great change in her manner towards me. Her eyes dwelt lovingly on me, and her keenest suffering, and the unfortunate blundering expressions I frequently let fall, seemed equally powerless to wring one harsh or impatient word from her. I was not now only one among her children, privileged to come and sit at her feet, to have with them a share in her impartial affection, and remembering that I was a stranger in the house, and compared but poorly with the others, the undistinguished preference she showed for me, and the wish to have me almost constantly with her, seemed a great mystery. One afternoon, as I sat alone with her, she made the remark that my reading lessons had ceased. "Oh yes, I can read perfectly well now," I answered. "May I read to you from this book?" Saying which, I put my hand towards a volume lying on the couch at her side. It differed from the other books that I had seen, in its smaller size and blue binding. "No, not this book," she said with a shade of annoyance in her voice, putting out her hand to prevent my taking it. "Have I made another mistake?" I asked, withdrawing my hand. "I am very ignorant." "Yes, poor boy, you are ignorant," she returned, placing her hand on my forehead. "You must know that this is a mother's book, and only a mother may read in it." "I am afraid," I said with a sigh, "that it will be a long time before I cease to offend you with such mistakes." "There is no occasion to say that, for you have not offended me, only you make me feel sorry. Every day when you are with me, I try to teach you something to smooth the path for you. But you must remember, my son, that others cannot feel towards you as I do, and it may come to pass that they will sometimes be offended with you, because their love is less than mine." "But why do you care so much for me?" I asked, emboldened by her words. "Once I thought that you only of all the house could never love me. What has changed your feelings towards me? For I know that they have changed." She looked at me, smiling a little sadly, but did not reply. "I think I should be happier for knowing," I resumed, caressing her hand. "Will you not tell me?" There was a strange trouble on her face, as her eyes glanced away and then returned to mine again, while her lips quivered as if with unspoken words. Then she answered, "No, I cannot tell you now. It would make you happy, perhaps, but the proper time has not arrived yet. You must be patient and learn, for you have much to learn. It is my desire that you should know all the things concerning the family of which you are ignorant. And when I say all, I mean not only those suitable to one in your present condition, as a son of the house, but also those higher matters which belong to the heads of the house, to the father and mother." Then, casting away all caution, I answered, "It is precisely a knowledge of those greater matters concerning the family which I have been hungering after ever since I came into the house." "I know," she returned. "This hunger you speak of was partly the cause of your fever, and it is in you, keeping you feverish and feeble still. But for this, instead of being a prisoner here, you would now be abroad, feeling the sun and wind on your face." "And if you know that," I pleaded, "why do you not now impart that knowledge that may make me whole? For surely all these lesser matters, those things suitable for one in my condition to know, can be learned afterwards in due time, for they are not of pressing importance. But the other is to me a matter of life and death if you only knew it." "I know everything," she returned quickly, but a cloud had come over her face at my concluding words, and a startled look into her eyes. "Life and death! Oh, do you know what you are saying?" she exclaimed, fixing her eyes on me with such an intense earnestness in them that mine fell abashed before her gaze. Then, after a while, she drew my head down against her knees, and spoke with a strange tenderness. "Do you then find it so hard to exercise a little patience, my son, that you do not acquiesce in what I say to you, and fear to trust your future in my hands? My time is short for all that I have to do, yet I also must be patient and wait, although for me it is hardest. For now your coming, which I did not regard at first, seeing in you only a pilgrim like others, one who would through accidents of travel have been cast away and left homeless in the world, until we found and gave you shelter, now it has brought something new into my life. And if this fresh hope, which is only an old perished hope born again, ever finds fulfillment, then death will lose much of its bitterness. But there are difficulties in the way which only time and the energy of a soul that centers all its faculties in one desire, one enterprise can overcome. And the chief difficulty I find is in yourself, in that strange, untoward disposition, so often revealed in your conversation, which you have shown even now. For to be thus questioned and pressed, and to have my judgment doubted, would have greatly offended me in another. Remember this, and do not abuse the privilege you enjoy. Remember that you must greatly change before I can share with you the secrets of my heart that concern you. And bear in mind, my son, that I am not rebuking you for a want of knowledge, for I know that for many deficiencies you are not blameworthy. I know, for instance, that nature has denied to you that melodious and flexible voice in which it is our custom every day to render homage to the Father, and to express all the sacred feelings of our hearts, all our love for each other, the joy we have in life, and even our griefs and sorrows. For grief is like a dark, oppressive cloud, until from lip and hand it breaks in the rain of melody, and we are lighted, so that even the things that are painful give to life a new and chastened glory. And as with music, so with other arts, there is a twofold pleasure in contemplating our Father's works. In the first and lower kind you share with us, but the second, and more noble, springing from the first, is ours through that faculty by means of which the beauty and harmony of the visible world become transmuted in the soul, which is like a pencil of glass, receiving the white sunbeam into itself, and changing it to red, green, and violet colored light. Thus nature transmutes itself in our minds and is expressed in art.
But in you this second faculty is wanting, else you would not willingly forego so great a pleasure as its exercise affords, and love nature like one that loves his fellow man, but has no words to express so sweet a feeling. For the happiness of love with sympathy, when made known and returned, is increased an hundredfold. And in all artistic work we commune not with blind irrational nature, but with the unseen spirit which is in nature, inspiring our hearts, returning love for love, and rewarding our labor with enduring bliss.
Therefore it is your misfortune, not your fault, that you are deprived of the supreme solace and happiness. To this speech, which had a depressing effect on me, I answered sadly, every day I feel my deficiencies more keenly, and wish more ardently to lessen the great distance between us. But now, sweet mother, forgive me for saying it. Your words almost make me despond.
And yet, my son, I have spoken only to encourage you. I know your limitations, and expect nothing beyond your powers, nor do your errors greatly trouble me, believing as I do that in time you will be able to dismiss them from your mind. But the temper of your mind must be changed to be worthy of the happiness I have desired for you. Patience must chasten that reckless spirit in you. For feverish diligence, alternating with indifference or despondence, there must be unremitting effort; and for that unsteady flame of hope, which bursts so brightly in the morning, and in the evening sings so low, there must be a bright, unwavering, and rational hope. It would be strange indeed if after this you were cast down; and lest you forget anything, I will say again, that only by giving you enduring happiness and the desire of your heart can my one hope be fulfilled. Consider how much I say to you in these words. It saddens me to think that so much was necessary, and do not think hardly of me, my son, for wishing to keep you a little longer in this prison with me. For in a little while your weakness will pass away like a morning cloud, but for me there shall come no changes, since I must remain in day and night here with the shadow of death. And when I am taken forth, and the sunshine falls once more in my face, I shall not feel it, and shall not see it, and I shall lie forgotten when you are in the midst of your happy years. Her words smote on my heart with a keen pain of compassion. Do not say that you will be forgotten, I exclaimed passionately, for should you be taken away, I shall still love and worship your memory, as I love and worship you now when you are alive. She caressed my hand, but did not speak, and when I looked up, her worn face had dropped on the pillow, her eyes were closed. I am tired, she murmured. Stay with me a little longer, but leave me if I sleep.
And in a little while she slept. The light was on her face, resting on the purple pillow, and with the soulful eyes closed, and the lips that had no red color of life in them also closed and motionless, it was like a face carved in ivory of one who had suffered like Isarte in the house, and perished long generations ago. And the abundant, dark, lusterless hair that framed it looked dead too, and of the color of wrought iron. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of A Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle. A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 18. Chastel's words sank deep in my heart, deeper than words had ever sunk before into that somewhat unpromising soil. And although she had purposely left me in the dark with regard to many important matters, I now resolved to win her esteem, and bind her yet more closely to me by correcting those faults in my character she had pointed out with so much tenderness. Alas, the very next day was destined to bring me a sore trouble. On entering the breakfast room, I became aware that a shadow had fallen on the house. Among his silent people the father sat with gray, haggard face and troubled eyes. Then Yoletta entered, her sweet face looking paler than when I had first seen it after her long punishment, while under her heavy, drooping eyelids her skin was stained with that mournful purple which tells of a long vigil and a heart oppressed with anxiety. I heard with profound concern that Chastel's malady had suddenly become aggravated, that she had passed the night in greatest suffering. What would become of me, and of all those bright dreams of happiness, if she were to die? Was my first idea. But at the same time I had the grace to feel ashamed of that selfish thought. Nevertheless, I could not shake off the gloom it had produced in me, and too distressed in mind to work or read, I repaired to the mother's room, to be as near as possible to the sufferer on whose recovery so much now depended. How lonely and desolate it seemed there now that she was absent! Those mountain landscapes, glowing with the white radiance of mimic sunshine, still made perpetual summer, yet there seemed to be a wintry chill and deathlike atmosphere which struck to the heart, and made me shiver with cold. The day dragged slowly to its close, and no rest came to the sufferer, nor sign of improvement to relieve our anxiety. Until past midnight I remained at my post, then retired for 3 or 4 miserable, anxious hours, only to return once more when it was scarcely light. Chastel's condition was still unchanged, or, if there had been any change, it was for the worse, for she had not slept. Again I remained a prey to desponding thoughts all day in the room, but towards evening Yoletta came to take me to her mother. The summons so terrified me that for some moments I sat trembling and unable to articulate a word, for I could not but think that Chastel's end was approaching. Yoletta, however, divining the cause of my agitation, explained that her mother could not sleep for torturing pains in her head, and wished me to place my hand on her forehead, to try whether that would cause any relief. This seemed to me a not very promising remedy, but she told me that on former occasions they had often succeeded in procuring her ease by placing a hand on her forehead, and that, having failed now, Chastel had desired them to call me to her to try my hand. I rose, and for the first time entered that sacred chamber, where Chastel was lying on a low bed, placed on a slightly raised platform in the centre of the floor. In the dim light her face looked white as the pillow on which it rested. Her forehead was contracted with sharp pain, while low moans came at short intervals from her twitching lips. But her wide open eyes were fixed on my face from the moment I entered the room, and to me they seemed to express mental anguish rather than physical suffering. At the head of the bed sat the father, holding her hand in his, but when I entered he rose and made way for me, retiring to the foot of the bed, where 2 of the women were seated. I knelt beside the bed, and Yoletta raised and tenderly placed my right hand on the mother's forehead, and, after whispering to me to let it rest very gently there, she also withdrew a few paces. Chastel did not speak, but for some minutes continued her low, piteous moanings. Only her eyes remained fixed on my face, and at last, becoming uneasy at her scrutiny, I said in a whisper, "Dearest mother, do you wish to say anything to me?"
Yes, come nearer, she replied,
And when I had bent my cheek close to her face, she continued,
do not fear, my son. I shall not die. I cannot die until that of which I have spoken to you has been accomplished.
I rejoiced at her words, yet at the same time they gave me pain, for it seemed as though she knew how much my heart had been troubled by that ignoble fear. "Dear mother, may I say something?" I asked, wishing to tell her of my resolutions.
Not now. I know what you wish to say,
she returned.
Be patient and hopeful always, and fear nothing. even though we should be long divided before I can leave this room to speak with you again." So softly had she whispered that the others who stood near were not aware that she had spoken at all. After this brief colloquy she closed her eyes, but for some time the low moans of pain continued. Gradually they sank lower and became less and less frequent, while the lines of pain faded out of her white, deathlike face. At length Yoletta, stealing softly to my side, whispered, "She is sleeping," and withdrawing my hand led me away. When we were again in the mother's room, she threw her arms about my neck and burst into a tempest of tears. "Dearest Yoletta, be comforted," I said, pressing her to my breast. "She will not die." "Oh, Smith, how do you know?" she returned quickly, looking up with her eyes still shining with large drops. Then of Chastel's whispered words to me, I repeated those four, "I shall not die," but nothing more. They were, however, a great relief to her, and her sweet, sorrowful face brightened like a drooping flower after rain. Ah, she knew then that the touch of your hand would cause sleep, that sleep would save her, she said, smiling up at me. "And you, my darling, how long is it since you closed those sweet eyelids that seemed so heavy?" "Not since I slept 3 nights ago." "Will you sit by me here, resting your head on me, and sleep a little now?" "Not here," she cried quickly, "not on the mother's couch, but if you will sit here, it will be pleasant if I can sleep for a little while resting on you." I placed myself on the low seat she led me to, and then, when she had coiled herself up on the cushions, with her arms still round my neck and her head resting on my bosom, she breathed a long happy sigh, and dropped like a tired child to sleep. How perfect my happiness would have been then, with Yoletta in my arms, clasping her weary little ministering hands in mine, and tenderly kissing her dark shining hair, but for the fear that some person might come there to notice and disturb me. And pretty soon I was startled to see the father himself coming from Chastel's chamber to us. Catching sight of me, he paused, smiling, then advanced and deliberately sat down by my side.
"This one is sleeping also,"
he said, cheerfully touching the girl's hair with his hand.
"But you need not fear, Smith. I think we shall be able to talk very well without waking her."
I had feared something quite different, if he had only known it, and felt considerably relieved by his words. Nevertheless, I was not over pleased at the prospect of a conversation just then, and would have preferred being left alone with my precious burden.
"My son,"
he continued, placing a hand on my shoulder,
"I sometimes recall, not without a smile, the effect your first appearance produced on us, when we were startled at your somewhat grotesque pilgrim costume. Your attempts at singing, and ignorance of art generally, also impressed me unfavorably, and gave me some concern when I thought about the future, that is, your future, for it seemed to me that you had but slender foundations whereupon to build a happy life. These doubts, however, no longer trouble me, for on several occasions you have shown us that you possess abundantly that richest of all gifts, and safest guide to happiness, the capacity for deep affection. To this spirit of love in you, this summer of the heart which causes it to blossom with beautiful thoughts and deeds, I attribute your success just now, when the contact of your hand produced the long-desired, refreshing slumber so necessary to the mother at this stage of her malady. I know that this is a mysterious thing, and it is commonly said that in such cases relief is caused by an emanation from the brain through the fingers. Doubtless this is so, and I also choose to believe that only a powerful spirit of love in the heart can rightly direct this subtle energy, that where such a spirit is absent the desired effect cannot be produced." "I do not know," I replied. "Great as my love and devotion is, I cannot suppose it to equal, much less surpass, that of others who failed on this occasion to give relief." "Yes, yes, only that is looking merely at the surface of the matter, and leaving out of sight the unfathomable mysteries of a being compounded of flesh and spirit. There are among our best instruments peculiar to this house, especially those used chiefly in our harvest music, some of such finely tempered materials, and of so delicate a construction, that the person wishing to perform on them must not only be inspired with the melodious passion, but the entire system, body and soul, must be in the proper mood, the flesh itself elevated into harmony with the exalted spirit, else he will fail to elicit the tones or to give the expression desired. This is a rough and poor simile, when we consider how wonderful an instrument a human being is, with a body that burns with thought, and the spirit that quivers and cries with pain; and when we think how its innumerable complex chords may be injured and untuned by suffering. The will may be ours, but something, we know not what, interposes to defeat our best efforts. That you have succeeded in producing so blessed a result, after we had failed, has served to deepen and widen in our hearts the love we already felt for you. For how much more precious is this melody of repose, this sweet interval of relief from cruel pain the mother now experiences, than many melodies from clear voices and trained hands. In my secret heart I believed that he was taking much too lofty a view of the matter, but I had no desire to argue against so flattering a delusion, if it were one, and only wished that I could share it with him. "She is sleeping still," he said presently, "perhaps without pain, like Yoletta here, and her sleep will now probably last for some hours." "I pray Heaven that she may wake refreshed and free from pain," I remarked. He seemed surprised at my words, and looked searchingly into my face. "My son," he said, "it grieves me, at a moment like the present, to have to point out a great error to you, but it is an error hurtful to yourself and painful to those who see it, and if I were to pass it over in silence, or put off speaking of it to another time, I should not be fulfilling the part of a loving father towards you." Surprised at his speech, I begged him to tell me what I had said that was wrong. "Do you not know, then, that it is unlawful to entertain such a thought as you have expressed?" he said. "In moments of supreme pain or bitterness or peril we sometimes so far forget ourselves as to cry out to Heaven to save us or to give us ease, but to make any such petition when we are in the full possession of our faculties is unworthy of a reasonable being and offense to the Father, for we pray to each other and are moved by such prayers, remembering that we are fallible and often err through haste and forgetfulness and imperfect knowledge. But he who freely gave us life and reason and all good gifts needs not that we should remind him of anything. Therefore, to ask him to give us the things we desire is to make him like ourselves, and charge him with an oversight, or worse, we attribute weakness and irresolution to him, since the petitioner thinks my importunity to incline the balance in his favor." I was about to reply that I had always considered prayer to be an essential part of religion, and not of my form of religion only, but of all religions all over the world. Luckily, I remembered in time that he probably knew more about matters all over the world than I did, and so held my tongue. "Have you any doubts on the subject?" he asked after a while. "I confess that I still have some doubts," I replied. "I believe that our Creator and Father desires the happiness of all his creatures, and takes no pleasure in seeing us miserable, for it would be impossible not to believe it, seeing how greatly happiness overbalances misery in the world.
But he does not come to us in visible form to tell us in an audible voice that to cry out to him in sore pain and distress is unlawful. How then do we know this thing? For a child cries to its mother, and a fledgling in the nest to its parent bird, and he is infinitely more to us than parent to child, infinitely stronger to help, and knows our griefs as no fellow mortal can know them. May we not, then, believe, without hurt to our souls, that the cry of one of his children in affliction may reach him? That his compassion, and by means of his sovereign power over nature, he may give ease to the racked body, and peace and joy to the desolate mind?
You ask me how, then, do we know this thing? And you answer the question yourself, yet fail to perceive that you answer it, when you say that although he does not come in a visible form to teach us this thing and that thing, yet we know that he desires our happiness, and to this you might add 1,000 or 10,000 other things which we know. If the reason he gave us to start with makes it unnecessary that he should come to tell us in an audible voice that he desires our happiness, it must also surely suffice to tell us which are lawful and unlawful of all the thoughts continually rising in our hearts. That any one should question so evident and universally accepted a truth, the foundation of all religion, seems very surprising to me. If it had consisted with his plan to make these delicate mortal bodies capable of every agreeable sensation in the highest degree, yet not liable to accident and not subject to misery and pain, he would surely have done this for all of us. But reason and nature show us that such an end did not consist with his plan. Therefore, to ask him to suspend the operations of nature for the benefit of any individual sufferer, however poignant and unmerited the suffering may be, is to shut our eyes to the only light he has given us. All our highest and sweetest feelings unite with reason to tell us with one voice that he loves us, and our knowledge of nature shows us plainly enough that he also loves all the creatures inferior to man. To us he has given reason for a guide, and for the guidance and protection of the lower kinds he has given instinct, and though they do not know him, it would make us doubt his impartial love for all his creatures if we, by making use of our reason, higher knowledge, and articulate speech, were able to call down benefits on ourselves, and avert pain and disaster, while the dumb, irrational brute suffered in silence, the languishing deer that leaves the herd with a festering thorn in its foot, the passage bird blown from its course to perish miserably far out to sea. His conclusions were perhaps more logical than mine. Nevertheless, although I could not argue the matter any more with him, I was not yet prepared to abandon this last cherished shred of old beliefs, although perhaps not cherished for its intrinsic worth, but rather because it had been given to me by a sweet woman whose memory was sacred to me, my mother before Chastel. Fortunately, it was not necessary to continue the discussion any longer, for at this juncture one of the watchers from the sick room came to report that the mother was still sleeping peacefully, hearing which the father rose to seek a little needful rest in an adjoining room. Before going, however, he proposed, with mistaken kindness, to relieve me of my burden, and placed the girl without waking her on a couch. But I would not consent to have her disturbed, and finally, to my great delight, they left her still in my arms, the father warmly pressing my hand and advising me to reflect well on his words concerning prayer. It was growing dark now, and how welcome that obscurity seemed, while with no one nigh to see or hear I kissed her soft tresses 100 times, and murmured 100 endearing words in her sleeping ears. Her waking, which gave me a pang at first, afforded me in the end still greater bliss. "Oh, how dark it is! Where am I?" she exclaimed, starting suddenly from repose. "With me, sweetest," I said. "Do you not remember going to sleep on my breast?"
Yes, but oh, why did you not wake me sooner? My mother, oh, my mother!"
"She is still quietly sleeping, dearest. Ah, I wish you also had continued sleeping. It was such a delight to have you in my arms."
My love, she said, laying her soft cheek against mine, how sweet it was to fall asleep in your arms. When we came in here I could scarcely say a word, for my heart was too full for speech. And now I have 100 things to say. After all, I should only finish by giving you a kiss, which is more eloquent than speech. So I shall kiss you at once, and save myself the trouble of talking so much.
"Say one of the 100 things, Yoletta."
Oh, Smith, before this evening I did not think I could love you more, and sometimes when I recalled what I once said to you on the hill, do you remember? It seemed to me that I already loved you a little too much. But now I am convinced that I was mistaken, for 1,000 offenses could not alienate my heart, which is all yours forever.
"Mine forever, without a doubt, darling," I murmured, holding her against my breast, and in my rapture almost forgetting that this angelic affection she lavished on me would not long satisfy my heart.
Yes, forever, for you shall never, never leave the house. Your pilgrimage, from which you derive so little benefit, is over now, and if you ever attempt to go forth again to find out new wonders in the world, I shall clasp you round with my arms, as I do now, and keep you prisoner against your will. And if you say farewell 100 times to me, I shall blot out that sad word every time with my lips, and put a better one in its place until my word conquers yours.
End of chapter 18.
19 of A Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle. A Crystal Age by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 19. Although deprived for the present of all intercourse with Chastel and Yoletta, now in constant attendance on her mother, I ought to have been happy, for all things seemed conspiring to make my life precious to me. Nevertheless, I was far from happy, and having heard so much said about reason in my late conversations with the father and the mother of the house, I began to pay an unusual amount of attention to this faculty in me, in order to discover by its aid the secret of the sadness which continued at all times during this period to oppress my heart. I only discovered what others have discovered before me, that the practice of introspection has a corrosive effect on the mind, which only serves to aggravate the malady it is intended to cure. During those restful days in the mother's room, when I had sat with Chastel, the spirit of melancholy had been with me, but the mother's hallowing presence had given something of a divine color to it. My passions had slumbered, and, except at rare intervals, I had thought of sorrow as something at an immeasurable distance from me. Then to my spirit the gushing of the wave, far, far away, did seem to mourn and rave on alien shores. And so sweet had seemed that pause, that I had hoped and prayed for its continuance. No sooner was I separated from her than the charm dissolved, and all my thoughts, like evening clouds that appear luminous and rich in color until the sun has set, began to be darkened with a mysterious gloom. Strive how I might, I was unable to compose my mind to that serene, trustful temper she had desired to see in me, and without which there could be no blissful futurity. After all the admonitions and the comforting assurances I had received, and in spite of reason and all it could say to me, each night I went to my bed with a heavy heart, and each morning when I woke, there by my pillow waited that sad phantom, to go with me wherever I went, to remind me at every pause of an implacable fate, who held my future in its hands, who was mightier than Chastel, and who would shatter all her schemes for my happiness like vessels of brittle glass. Several days, probably about 15, for I did not count them, had passed since I had been admitted to the mother's sleeping room, when there came an exceedingly lovely day, which seemed to bring to me a pleasant sensation of returning health, and made me long to escape from morbid dreams and vain cravings. Why should I sit at home and mope? I thought it was better to be active. Sun and wind were full of healing. Such a day was in truth one of those Captain Jewels that seldom placed are among the blusterous days of autumn, with winter already present to speed his parting. For a long time the sky had been overcast with multitudes and endless, hurrying processions of wild-looking clouds, torn, wind-chased fugitives, of every mournful shade of color from the palest gray to slaty black, and storms of rain had been frequent, impetuous, and suddenly intermitted, or passing away phantom-like towards the misty hills, there to lose themselves among other phantoms, ever wandering sorrowfully in that vast shadowy borderland where earth and heaven mingled, and gusts of wind which, as they roared by over 1,000 straining trees and passed off with hoarse volleying sounds, seemed to mimic the echoing thunder. And the leaves, the millions and myriads of sere, cast-off leaves, heaped ankle deep under the desolate giants of the wood, and everywhere in the hollows of the earth lying silent and motionless as became dead fallen things, suddenly catching a mock fantastic life from the wind, how they would all be up and stirring every leaf with a hiss like a viper, racing many thousands at a time over the barren spaces, all hurriedly talking together in their dead leaf language, until, smitten with a mightier gust, they would rise in flight on flight, in storms and stupendous eddying columns, whirled up to the clouds, to fall to the earth again in showers, and freckle the grass for roods around. Then, for a moment, far off in the heavens, there would be a rift, or a thinning of the clouds, and the sunbeams, striking like lightning through their ranks, would illumine the pale blue mist, the slanting rain, the gaunt black boles and branches glittering with wet, casting a momentary glory over the ocean-like tumult of nature. In the condition I was in, with a relaxed body and dejected mind, this tempestuous period, which would have only afforded fresh delight to a person in perfect health, had no charm for my spirit, but, on the contrary, it only served to intensify my gloom. And yet day after day it drew me forth, although in my weakness I shivered in the rough gale, and shrank from the touch of the big cold drops the clouds flung down on me. It fascinated me like the sight of armies contending in battle, or of some tragic action from which the spectator cannot withdraw his gaze. For I had become infected with strange fancies, so persistent and somber that they were like superstitions. It seemed to me that not I, but nature had changed, that the familiar light had passed like a kindly expression from a countenance which was now charged with an awful menacing gloom that frightened my soul. Sometimes, when straying alone, like an unquiet ghost among the leafless trees, when a deeper shadow swept over the earth, I would pause, pale with apprehension, listening to the many dirge-like sounds of the forest, ever prophesying evil, until in my trepidation I would start and tremble and look to this side and that, as if considering which way to fly from some unimaginable calamity coming, I knew not from where, to wreck my life forever. This bright day was better suited to my complaint. The sun shone as in spring. Not a stain appeared on the crystal vault of heaven. Everywhere the unfailing grass gave rest to the eye with its verdure, and a light wind blew fresh and bracing in my face, making my pulses beat faster, although feebly still. Remembering my happy wood-cutting days before my trouble had come to me, I got my axe and started to walk to the wood, when, seeing Yoletta watching my departure from the terrace, I waved my hand to her. Before I had gone far, however, she came running to me, full of anxiety, to warn me that I was not yet strong enough for such work. I assured her that I had no intention of working hard and tiring myself, and then continued my walk, while she returned to attend on her mother. The day was so bright with sunshine that it inspired me with a kind of passing gladness, and I began to hum snatches of old half-remembered songs. They were songs of departing summer, tinged with melancholy, and suggested other verses not meant for singing, which I began repeating. Rich flowers have perished on the silent earth, blossoms of valley and of wood that gave a fragrance to the winds. And again, the blithesome birds have sought a sunnier shore. They lingered till the cold, cold winds went in and withered their green homes. And these also were fragments, breathing only of sadness, which made me resolve to dismiss poetry from my mind, and think of nothing at all. I tried to interest myself in a flight of buzzard-like hawks, soaring in wide circles at an immense height above me, gazing up into that far blue vault under which they moved so serenely,
and which seemed so infinite. I remembered how often in former days, when gazing up into such a sky, I had breathed a prayer to the unseen Spirit. But now I recalled the words the Father of the house had spoken to me, and the prayer died unformed in my heart, and a strange feeling of orphanhood saddened me, and brought my eyes to earth again. Halfway to the wood, on an open reach where there were no trees or bushes, I came on a great company of storks, 1,000 of them at least, apparently resting on their travels, for they were all standing motionless, with necks drawn in, as if dozing. They were very stately, handsome birds, clear gray in color, with a black collar on the neck, and red beak and legs. My approach did not disturb them until I was within 20 yards of the nearest, for they were scattered over an acre of ground, and then they rose with a loud, rustling noise of wings, only to settle again a short distance off. Incredible numbers of birds, chiefly waterfowl, had appeared in the neighborhood since the beginning of the wet, boisterous weather. The river, too, was filled with these new visitors, and I was told that most of them were passengers driven from distant northern regions, which they made their summer home, and were now flying south in search of a warmer climate. All this movement in the feathered world had, during my troubled days, brought me as little pleasure as the other changes going on about me, those winged armies ever hurrying by in broken detachments, wailing and clanging by day and by night in the clouds, white with their own terror, or black plumed like messengers of doom. To my distempered fancy only added a fresh element of fear to a nature racked with disorders, and full of tremendous signs and omens. The interest with which I now remarked these pilgrim storks seemed to me a pleasant symptom of a return to a saner state of mind, and before continuing my walk I wished that Yoletta had been there with me, to see them and tell me their history, for she was curious about such matters, and had a most wonderful affection for the whole feathered race. She had her favorites among the birds at different seasons, and the kind she most esteemed now had been arriving for over a month, their numbers increasing day by day until the woods and the fields were alive with their flocks. This kind was named the cloudbird, on account of its starling like habit of wheeling about over its feeding ground, the birds throwing themselves into masses, then scattering and gathering again many times, so that when viewed at a distance a large flock had the appearance of a cloud, growing dark and thin alternately, and continually changing its form. It was somewhat larger than a starling, with a freer flight, and had a richer plumage, its color being deep glossy blue, or blue black, and underneath bright chestnut. When close at hand and in the bright sunshine, the aerial gambols of a flock were beautiful to witness, as the birds wheeled about and displayed in turn, as if moved by one impulse, first the rich blue, then the bright chestnut surfaces to the eye. And as they swept round or doubled in the air, at intervals came these tempests of melodious sound, a most perfect expression of wild, jubilant bird life. Yoletta, discoursing in the most delightful way about her loved cloudbirds, had told me that they spent the summer season in great solitary marshes, where they built their nests in the rushes; but with cold weather they flew abroad, and at such times seemed always to prefer the neighborhood of man, remaining in great flocks near the house until the next spring. On this bright sunny morning I was amazed at the multitudes I saw during my walk. Yet it was not strange that birds were so abundant, considering that there were no longer any savages on the earth, with nothing to amuse their vacant minds except killing the feathered creatures with their bows and arrows, and no innumerable company of squaws clamorous for trophies, unchristian women of the woods with painted faces, insolence in their eyes, and for ornaments the feathered skins torn from slain birds on their heads. When I at length arrived at the wood, I went to that spot where I had felled the large tree on the occasion of my last and disastrous visit, and where Yoletta, newly released from confinement, had found me. There lay the rough barked giant exactly as I had left it, and once more I began to hack at the large branches; but my feeble strokes seemed to make little impression, and becoming tired in a very short time, I concluded that I was not yet equal to such work, and sat myself down to rest. I remembered how, when sitting on that very spot, I had heard a slight rustling of the withered leaves, and looking up, beheld Yoletta coming swiftly towards me with outstretched arms, and her face shining with joy. Perhaps she would come again to me to day. Yes, she would surely come, when I wished for her so much, for she had followed me out to try to dissuade me from going to the woods, and would be anxiously thinking about me, and she could spare an hour from the sick room now. The trees and bushes would prevent me from seeing her approach.
but I should hear her as I heard her before. I sat motionless, scarcely breathing, straining my sense to catch the first faint sound of her light, swift step. And every time a small bird, hopping along the ground, rustled a withered leaf, I started up to greet and embrace her, but she did not come. And at last, sick at heart with hope deferred, I covered my face with my hands and, weak with misery, cried like a disappointed child. Presently something touched me, and removing my hands from my face, I saw that great silver-gray dog which had come to Yoletta's call when I fainted, sitting before me with his chin resting on my knees. No doubt he remembered that last wood-cutting day very well, and had come to take care of me now. "Welcome, dear old friend," I said, and in my craving for sympathy of some kind, I put my arms over him and pressed my face against his. Then I sat up again and gazed into the pair of clear brown eyes watching my face so gravely. "Look here, old fellow," I said, talking audibly to him for want of something in human shape to address, "you didn't lick my face just now when you might have done so with impunity. And when I speak to you, you don't wag that beautiful bushy tail which serves you for an ornament. This reminds me that you are not like the dogs I used to know, the dogs that talk with their tails, caressed with their tongues, and were never over clean or well behaved. Where are they now? Collies, rat-worrying terriers, hounds, spaniels, pointers, retrievers, dogs rough and dogs smooth, big brute boarhounds, St. Bernards, mastiffs, nearly or quite as big as you are, but not so slender, silky-haired and sharp-nosed, and without your refined expression of keenness without cunning. And after these canine noblemen of the old regime, whither has vanished the countless rabble of mongrels, curs, and pariah dogs, and last of all, being no more degenerate, the corpulent, blear-eyed, wheezy pet dogs of 100 breeds? They are all dead, no doubt. They have been dead so long that I dare say nature extracted all the valuable salts that were contained in their flesh and bones thousands of years ago, and used it for better things: raindrops, froth of the sea, flowers and fruit, blades of grass. Yet there was not a beast in all that crew of which its master or mistress was not ready to affirm that it could do everything but talk. No one says that of you, my gentle guardian, for dog worship, with all the 10,000 fungoid colts that sprang up and flourished exceedingly in the muddy marsh of man's intellect, has withered away and left no seed. Yet in intelligence you are, I fancy, somewhat ahead of your far-off progenitors. Long use has also given you something like a conscience. You are a good, sensible beast, that's all. You love and you serve your master, according to your lights, night and day. You, with your fellows, guard his flocks and herds, his house and fields. Into his sacred house, however, you do not intrude your comely countenance, knowing your place. What, then, happened to earth? And how long did that undreaming slumber last, from which I woke to find things so altered? I do not know, nor does it matter very much. I only know that there has been a sort of mighty Savonarola bonfire, in which most of the things once valued have been consumed to ashes: politics, religions, systems of philosophy, isms and ologies of all descriptions, schools, churches, prisons, poorhouses, stimulants, and tobacco, kings and parliaments, cannon with its hostile roar, and pianos that thundered peacefully, history, the press, vice, political economy, money, and a million things more, all consumed like so much worthless hay and stubble. This being so, why am I not overwhelmed at the thought of it? And in that feverish, full age, so full and yet, my God, how empty! In the wilderness of every man's soul, was not a voice heard crying out, prophesying the end? I know that a thought sometimes came to me, passing through my brain like lightning through the foliage of a tree, and in the quick, blighting fire of that intolerable thought, all hopes, beliefs, dreams, and schemes seemed instantaneously to shrivel up and turn to ashes, and drop from me and leave me naked and desolate. Sometimes it came when I read a book of philosophy, or listened on a still, hot Sunday to a dull preacher. They were mostly dull, prosing away to a sleepy, fashionable congregation about Daniel in the lion's den, or some other equally remote matter. Or when I walked in crowded thoroughfares, or when I heard some great politician out of office, out in the cold like a miserable working man with no work to do, hurling anathemas at an iniquitous government. And sometimes also when I lay awake in the silent watches of the night, a little while, the thought said, "And all this will be no more, for we have not found out the secret of happiness, and all our toil and effort is misdirected, and those who are seeking for a mechanical equivalent of consciousness, and those who are going about doing good, alike wasting their lives, and on all our hopes, beliefs, dreams, theories, and enthusiasms passing away, is written plainly as the Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin seen by Belshazzar on the wall of his palace in Babylon. That withering thought never comes to me now. Passing away is not written on the earth, which is still God's green footstool. The grass was not greener, nor the flowers sweeter, when man was first made out of clay, and the breath of life breathed into his nostrils, and the human family and race, outcome of all that dead, unimaginable past. This also appears to have the stamp of everlastingness on it, and in its tranquil power and majesty resembles some vast mountain that lifts its head above the clouds and has its granite roots deep down in the world's center. A feeling of awe is in me when I gaze on it, but it is vain to ask myself now whether the vanished past, with its manifold troubles and transitory delights, was preferable to this unchanging, peaceful present. I care for nothing but Yoletta, and if the old world was consumed to ashes that she might be created, I am pleased that it was so consumed, for nobler than all perished hopes and ambitions is the hope that I may one day bear that bright, consummate flower on my bosom. I have only one trouble now, a wolf that follows me everywhere, always threatening to rend me to pieces with its black jaws. Not you, old friend. A great, gaunt, man-eating, metaphorical wolf, far more terrible than that beast of the ancients which came to the poor man's door. In the darkness its eyes, glowing like coals, are ever watching me, and even in the bright daylight its shadowy form is ever near me, stealing from bush to bush, or from room to room, always dogging my footsteps. Will it ever vanish, like a mere phantom, a wolf of the brain? Or will it come nearer and more near, to spring upon and rend me at the last? If they could only clothe my mind as they have my body, to make me like themselves, with no canker at my heart, ever contented and calmly glad! But nothing comes from taking thought. I am sick of thought. I hate it. Away with it. I shall go and look for Yoletta, since she does not come to me. Goodbye, old friend. You have been well behaved, and listened with considerable patience to a long discourse. It will benefit you about as much as I have been benefited by many a lecture and many a sermon I was compelled to listen to in the old vanished days. Bestowing another caress on him, I got up and went back to the house, thinking sadly as I walked that the bright weather had not greatly improved my spirits. End of section 19.
Money of a Crystal Age. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 20. Arrived at the house, I was again disappointed at not seeing Yoletta, yet without reasonable cause, since it was scarcely past midday, and she came out from attending on her mother only at long intervals, in the morning and again just before evening, to taste the freshness of nature for a few minutes. The music room was deserted when I went there, but it was made warm and pleasant by the sun shining brightly in at the doors opening to the south. I went on to the extreme end of the room, remembering now that I had seen some volumes there when I had no time or inclination to look at them, and I wanted something to read. For although I found reading very irksome at this period, there was really little else I could do. I found the books, 3 volumes, in the lower part of an alcove in the wall. Above them, within a niche in the alcove, on a level with my face as I stood there, I observed a bulb-shaped bottle, with a long thin neck, very beautifully colored. I had seen it before, but without paying particular attention to it, there being so many treasures of its kind in the house. Now, seeing it so closely, I could not help admiring its exquisite beauty, and feeling puzzled at the scene depicted on it. In the widest part it was encircled with a band, and on it appeared slim youths and maidens in delicate rose-colored garments, with butterfly wings on their shoulders, running or hurriedly walking, playing on instruments of various forms, their faces shining with gladness, their golden hair tossed by the wind, a gay procession, without beginning or end. Behind these joyful ones, in pale grey, and half obscured by the mists that formed the background, appeared a second procession, hurrying in an opposite direction, men and women of all ages, but mostly old, with haggard, woe-begone faces, some bowed down, their eyes fixed on the ground, others wringing their hands or beating their breasts, and all apparently suffering the utmost affliction of mind. Above the bottle there was a deep circular cell in the alcove, about 15 inches in diameter. Fitted in it was a metal ring, to which were attached golden strings, fine as gossamer threads. Behind the first ring was a second, and further in still others, all stringed like the first, so that looking into the cell it appeared filled with a mist of golden cobweb. Drawing a cushioned seat to this secluded nook, where no person passing casually through the room would be able to see me, I sat down, and feeling too indolent to get myself a reading stand, I supported the volume I had taken up to read on my knees. It was entitled Conduct and Ceremonial, and the subject matter was divided into short sections, each with an appropriate heading. Turning over the leaves, and reading a sentence here and there in different sections, it occurred to me that this might prove a most useful work for me to study, whenever I could bring my mind into the right frame for such a task, for it contained minute instructions upon all points relating to individual conduct in the house, as the entertainment of pilgrims, the dress to be worn, and the conduct to be observed at the various annual festivals, with other matters of the kind. Glancing through it in this rapid way, I soon finished with the first volume, then went through the second in even less time, for many of the concluding sections related to lugubrious subjects which I did not care to linger over. The titles alone were enough to trouble me: Decay through Age, Ailments of Mind and of Body, then Death, and finally the Disposal of the Dead. This done, I took up the third volume, the last of the series, the first portion of which was headed Renewal of the Family. This part I began to examine with some attention, and pretty soon discovered that I had now at last accidentally stumbled upon a perfect mine of information of the precise kind I had so long and so vainly been seeking. Struggling to overcome my agitation, I read on, hurrying through page after page with the greatest rapidity, for there was here much matter that had no special interest for me, but incidentally the things which concerned me most to know were touched on, and in some cases minutely explained. As I proceeded, the prophetic gloom which had oppressed me all that day, and for so many days before, darkened to the blackness of despair, and suddenly throwing up my arms, the book slipped from my knees and fell with a crash upon the floor. There, face downwards, with its beautiful leaves doubled and broken under its weight, it rested unheeded at my feet. For now the desired knowledge was mine, and that dream of happiness which had illumined my life was over. Now I possessed the secret of that passionless, everlasting calm of beings who had forever outlived and left as immeasurably far behind as the instincts of the wolf and ape, the strongest emotion of which my heart was capable. For the children of the house there could be no union by marriage. In body and soul they differed from me. They had no name for that feeling which I had so often and so vainly declared. Therefore they had told me again and again that there was only one kind of love, for they, alas, could experience one kind only. I did not for the moment seek further in the book, or pause to reflect on that still unexplained mystery, which was the very centre and core of the whole matter, namely, the existence of the father and mother in the house, from whose union the family was renewed, and who, fruitful themselves, were yet the parents of a barren race. Nor did I ask who their successors would be, for albeit long-lived, they were mortal like their own passionless children, and in this particular house their lives appeared now to be drawing to an end. These were questions I cared nothing about. It was enough to know that Yoletta could never love me as I loved her, that she could never be mine, body and soul, in my way and not in hers. With unspeakable bitterness I recalled my conversation with Chastel. Now all her professions of affection and good will, all her schemes for smoothing my way and securing my happiness, seemed to me the veriest mockery, since even she had read my heart no better than the others, and that chill moonlight felicity, beyond which her children were powerless to imagine anything, had no charm for my passion torn heart. Presently, when I began to recover somewhat from my stupefaction, and to realize the magnitude of my loss, the misery of it almost drove me mad. I wished that I had never made this fatal discovery, that I might have continued still hoping and dreaming, and wearing out my heart with striving after the impossible, since any fate would have been preferable to the blank desolation which now confronted me. I even wished to possess the power of some implacable god or demon, that I might shatter the sacred houses of this later race, and destroy them everlastingly, and repeople the peaceful world with struggling, starving millions, as in the past, so that the beautiful flower of love which had withered in men's hearts might blossom again. While these insane thoughts were passing through my brain, I had risen from my seat and stood leaning against the edge of the alcove, with that curious, richly colored bottle close to my eyes. There were letters on it, noticed now for the first time, minute hair-like lines beneath the strange contrasted processionists depicted on the band, and even in my excited condition I was a little startled when these letters, forming the end of a sentence, shaped themselves into the words, "And for the old life there shall be a new life." Turning the bottle round, I read the whole sentence. "When time and disease oppress, and the sun grows cold in heaven, and there is no longer any joy on the earth, and the fire of love grows cold in the heart, drink of me, and for the old life there shall be a new life." Another important secret, thought I. This day has certainly been fruitful in discoveries. A panacea for all diseases, even for the disease of old age, so that a man may live 200 years and still find some pleasure in existence. But for me life has lost its savour, and I have no wish to last so long. There is more writing here, another secret perhaps, but I doubt very much that it will give me any comfort. When your soul is darkened so that it is hard to know evil from good, and the thoughts that are in you lead to madness, drink of me and be cured. No, I shall not drink and be cured. Better 1,000 times the thoughts that lead to madness than this colourless existence without love. I do not wish to recover from so sweet a malady. I took the bottle in my hand and unstopped it. The stopper formed a curious little cup, round the rim of which was written, "Drink of me." I poured some of the liquid out into the cup. It was pale yellow in colour, and had a faint sickly smell as of honeysuckles. Then I poured it back again, and replaced the bottle in its niche. Drink and be cured. No, not yet. Some day perhaps my trouble increasing till it might no longer be borne, would drive me to seek such dreary comfort as this cure-all bottle contained. To love without hope was sad enough, but to be without love was even sadder. I had grown calm now. The knowledge that I had it in my power to escape at once and for ever from that rage of desire had served to sober my mind, and at last I began to reason about the matter. The nature of my secret feelings could never be suspected, and in the unsubstantial realm of the imagination it would still be in my power to hide myself with my love and revel in all supreme delight. Would not that be better than this cure, this calm contentment held out to me? And in time also my feelings would lose their present intensity, which often made them an agony, and would come at last to exist only as a gentle rapture stirring in my heart when I clasped my darling to my bosom and pressed her sweet lips with mine. Ah, no, that was a vain dream. I could not be deceived by it, for who can say to the demon of passion in him, "Thus far shalt thou go, and no further"? Perplexed in mind, and unable to decide which thing was best, my troubled thoughts at length took me back to that far-off dead past, when the passion of love was so much in man's life. It was much, but in that over-populated world it divided the empire of his soul with a great ever-growing misery. the misery of the hungry ones whose minds were darkened through long years of decadence with a sullen rage against God and man, and the misery of those who, wanting nothing, yet feared that the end of all things was coming to them. For the space of half an hour I pondered on these things, then said, "If I were to tell 100th part of this black retrospect to Yoletta, would not she bid me drink and forget, and herself pour out that divine liquor, and press it to my lips?" Again I took the bottle with trembling hand, and filled the same small cup to the brim, saying, "For your sake then, Yoletta, let me drink, and be cured, for this is what you desire, and you are more to me than life or passion or happiness. But when this consuming fire has left me, this feeling which until now burns and palpitates in every drop of my blood, every fibre of my being, I know that you shall still be to me a sweet sacred sister and immaculate bride, worshipped more of my soul than any mother in the house; that loving and being loved by you shall be my one great joy all my life long." I drained the cup deliberately, then stopped the bottle and put it back in its place. The liquor was tasteless, but colder than ice, and made me shiver when I swallowed it. I began to wonder whether I would be conscious of the change it was destined to work in me or not, and then, half regretting what I had done, I wished that Yoletta would come to me, so that I might clasp her in my arms with all the old fervour once more, before that icy cold liquor had done its work. Finally, I carefully raised the fallen book and smoothed out its doubled leaves, regretting that I had injured it, and sitting down again, I held the open volume as before, resting on my knees. Now, however, I perceived that it had opened at a place some pages in advance of the passages which had excited me; but feeling no desire to go back to resume my reading just where I had left off, my eyes mechanically sought the top of the page before me, and this is what I read: "Make choice of one of the daughters of the house. It is fitting that she should rejoice for that brighter excellence which caused her to be raised to so high a state, and to have authority over all others, since in her, with the father, all the majesty and glory of the house is centered; albeit with a solemn and chastened joy, like that of the pilgrim, who, journeying to some distant tropical region of the earth, and seeing the shores of his native country fading from sight, thinks at one and the same time of the unimaginable beauties of nature and art that fire his mind and call him away, and of the wide distance which will hold him for many years divided from all familiar scenes and the beings he loves best, and of the storms and perils of the great wilderness of waves into which so many have ventured and have not returned. For now a changed body and soul shall separate her forever from those who were one in nature with her. And with that superior happiness destined to be hers there shall be the pains and perils of childbirth, with new griefs and cares unknown to those of humbler condition. But on that lesser gladness had by the children of the house in her exaltation, and because there will be a new mother in the house, one chosen from themselves, there shall be no cloud or shadow. And taking her by the hand and kissing her face in token of joy and of that new filial love and obedience which will be theirs, they shall lead her to the mother's room, thereafter to be inhabited by her as long as life lasts. And she shall no longer serve in the house or suffer rebuke, but all shall serve her and love and hold her in reverence who is their predestined mother. And for the space of 1 year she shall be without authority in the house, being one apart, instructing herself in the secret books which it is not lawful for another to read, and observing day by day the directions contained therein, until that new knowledge and practice shall ripen her for that state she has been chosen to fill." This passage was a fresh revelation to me. Again I recalled Chastel's words, her repeated assurances that she knew what was passing in my mind, that her eyes saw things more clearly than others could see them, that only by giving me the desire of my heart could the one remaining hope of her life be fulfilled. Now I seemed able to understand these dark sayings, and a new excitement, full of the joy of hope, sprang up in me, making me forget the misery I had so recently experienced, and even that increasing sensation of intense cold caused by the draught from the mysterious bottle. I continued reading, but the above passage was succeeded by minute instructions, extending over several pages, concerning the dress, both for ordinary and extraordinary occasions, to be worn by the chosen daughter during her year of preparation; the conduct to be observed by her towards other members of the family, also towards pilgrims visiting the house in the interval, with many other matters of secondary importance. Impatient to reach the end, I tried to turn the leaves rapidly, but now found that my arm had grown strangely stiff and cold, and seemed like an arm of iron when I raised it, so that the turning over of each leaf was an immense labour. Then I read yet another page, but with the utmost difficulty, for notwithstanding the eagerness of my mind, my eyes began to remain more and more rigidly fixed on the centre of the leaf, so that I could scarcely force them to follow the lines. Here I read that the bride elect, her year of preparation being over, rises before daylight and goes out alone to an appointed place at a great distance from the house, there to pass several hours in solitude and silence, communing with her own heart. Meanwhile in the house all the others array themselves in purple garments, and go out singing at sunrise to gather flowers to adorn their heads. Then proceeding to the appointed spot, they seek for their new mother, and finding her, lead her home with music and rejoicing. When reading in this miserable painful way, I had reached the bottom of the page and attempted to turn it over, I found that I could no longer move my hand, my arms being now like arms of iron, absolutely devoid of sensation, while my hands, rigidly grasping the book, like the hands of a frozen corpse, held it upright and motionless before me. I tried to start up and shake off this strange deadness from my body, but was powerless to move a muscle. What was the meaning of this condition? For I had absolutely no pain, no discomfort even, for the sensation of intense cold had almost ceased, and my mind was active and clear, and I could hear and see, and yet was as powerless as if I had been buried in a marble coffin 1,000 fathoms deep in the earth. Suddenly I remembered the draught from the bottle, and a terrible doubt shot through my heart. Alas! had I mistaken the meaning of those strange words I had read? Was death the cure which that mysterious vessel promised to those who drank of its contents? When life becomes a burden, it is good to lay it down. Now too late the words of the Father, when reproving me after my fever, came back to my mind in all their awful significance. All at once I heard a voice calling my name, and in a moment the tempest in me was stilled. Yes, it was my darling's voice. She was coming to me. She would save me in this dire extremity. Again and again she called, but the voice now sounded further and further away, and with ineffable anguish I remembered that she would not be able to see me where I sat. I tried to cry out, "Come quick, Yoletta, and save me from death!" But though I mentally repeated the words again and again in an extreme agony of terror, my frozen tongue refused to make a sound. Presently I heard a light, quick step on the floor, then Yoletta's clear voice. "Oh, I have found you at last!" she cried. "I have been seeking you all over the house. I have something glad to tell you, something to make you happier than on that day. Do you remember, when you saw me coming to you in the wood? The mother has left her chamber at last. She is in the mother's room again, waiting impatiently to see you. Come, come!" Her words sounded distinctly in my ears, and although I could not lift or turn my rigid eyes to see her, yet I seemed to see her now better than ever before, with some fresh glory, as of a new unaccustomed gladness or excitement enhancing her unsurpassed loveliness. So clearly at that moment did her image shine in my soul, and not hers only, for now suddenly, by a miracle of the mind, the entire family appeared there before me, and in the midst sat Chastel, my sweet suffering mother, as on that day after my illness, when she had pardoned me and put out her hand for me to kiss. As on that occasion, now she was gazing on me with such divine love and compassion in her eyes, her lips half parted, and a slight colour flushing her pale face, recalling to it the bloom and radiance of which cruel disease had robbed her. And in my soul also, at that supreme moment, like a scene starting at the lightning's flash out of thick darkness, shone the image of the house, with all its wide, tranquil rooms, rich in art and ancient memories, every stone within them glowing with everlasting beauty, a house enduring as the green plains and rushing rivers and solemn woods and world, old hills amid which it was set like a sacred gem. O sweet abode of love and peace and purity of heart! O bliss surpassing that of angels! O rich heritage! Must I lose you for ever? Save me from death, Yoletta, my love, my bride! Save me, save me, save me!" Then something touched or fell on my neck, and at that same moment a deeper shadow passed over the page before me, with all its rich colouring, floating formless, like vapours, mingling and separating, or dancing before my vision like bright winged insects hovering in the sunlight; and I knew that she was bending over me, her hand on my neck, her loose hair falling on my forehead. In that enforced stillness and silence I waited expectant for some moments. Then a great cry, as of one who suddenly sees a black phantom, rang out loud in the room, jarring my brain with the madness of its terror, and striking as with 100 passionate hands on all the hidden harps in wall and roof; and the troubled sounds came back to me, now loud and now low, burdened with an infinite anguish and despair, as of voices of innumerable multitudes wandering in the sunless desolations of space, every voice reverberating anguish and despair; and the successive reverberations lifted me like waves and dropped me again, and the waves grew less and the sounds fainter, then fainter still, and died in everlasting silence. End of Chapter 20. End of A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson.